The heat of the midday sun was relentless as Sarah Wilkins tried to move her wagon forward. The dust swirled around her, clinging to her skin, making everything feel heavier, as though even the air was working against her. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, her pregnancy weighing down on her more with each passing day. It had been a hard journey, one that had begun with her husband's death, and was now fueled by nothing but sheer willpower. Her husband Jacob had been the one to drive the wagon, the one who could handle the horses with a steady hand and a calm heart. But he'd been taken from her 2 months ago by a fever that had spread like wildfire through their small town. The doctors had been powerless, and now Sarah was left with nothing but the memory of him, a baby on the way, and this damned wagon to haul across the unforgiving plains. She had no choice but to push on. There was nowhere else to go. Sarah had set out from the town of Garrison with one goal in mind: reach her sister's house in the next town over. There she hoped to find refuge, maybe even a bit of peace, as she prepared for the birth of her child. But every mile had been harder than the last. The horses, old and tired, barely had enough strength to pull the heavy load. The trail was rough, full of rocks and mud, and Sarah's body ached from the constant strain of managing the wagon alone. She paused to check on the horses, running her hand over their damp flanks, trying to give them comfort. They were close to collapsing, their muscles trembling. Sarah muttered under her breath, frustration rising in her chest. The road was desolate, the wind was bitter, and there was no sign of life for miles. She was alone, utterly alone, and it was a crushing feeling. But she didn't have time for self-pity. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, and she needed to make camp before nightfall. Sarah knelt down, unrolling a blanket on the ground, when a distant sound reached her ears, a low rumble of hooves steadily growing louder. She stood up, shielding her eyes against the sun's dying light. A rider was approaching fast, a figure on horseback silhouetted against the fading orange sky. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, a flicker of nervousness passing through her. She was no fool. In this wild land, strangers could be dangerous. The rider drew closer, and Sarah instinctively stepped back toward her wagon, her hand hovering over the rifle she kept in the cart. She was a widow, pregnant, and alone. She wasn't foolish enough to trust anyone without caution. The cowboy's horse slowed as he reached the edge of her camp, his eyes narrowing on her tired form. He dismounted, boots thudding softly on the dirt as he approached. "You in trouble, lady?" His voice was deep, rough, like the crackle of a campfire, and his gaze scanned the scene, her struggling horses, the worn wagon, and the strain on her face. Sarah lifted her chin, forcing herself to look strong. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "Just need to get moving again." The man took a step forward, his gaze flicking to her rounded belly. He didn't speak for a moment, just watched her, sizing her up as though assessing whether or not she was telling the truth. Then he grunted. "Where are you headed?" "Garrison. To my sister's," she replied, her tone clipped, defensive. She wasn't about to share more than she needed to with a stranger. The cowboy scratched his jaw, then spat a stream of tobacco onto the ground. He took in the horses, the wagon, and the weary woman before him. A small sigh escaped his lips. "You ain't gonna make it to Garrison like this," he said. His words blunt but not unkind. "Not with the way those horses look." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I'll manage. I don't need any help." The cowboy raised an eyebrow, then looked over at the horses again. "You're proud, I can see that. But you're also pregnant, and that wagon of yours is too heavy. You'll be lucky if you get another day out of those horses." Sarah bristled, every part of her wanting to reject his offer. She hated feeling vulnerable, hated the idea of accepting help. She was used to relying on no one but herself. "I can do it," she insisted. The cowboy's gaze softened, but there was a hint of something almost like pity in his eyes. "Listen, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but you're gonna need help, whether you like it or not. It's not a weakness, lady, it's just common sense." A long silence stretched between them. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to stand her ground, but the weight of her exhaustion and the heat of the moment made her question if she could really do it alone. She could see the truth in his words. The horses were clearly struggling, and the road ahead seemed even more unforgiving. The cowboy took a step back, hands resting on his hips. "I've got a wagon not far from here. You can ride with me. I won't take no for an answer." Sarah hesitated, then glanced down at her stomach, the life growing inside her stirring with a soft kick. She couldn't afford to be stubborn, not this time. With a deep breath, she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice quieter now. "I'll go with you." The cowboy gave her a small nod, his expression unreadable. "Good, let's get you out of here before dark." He led her to his wagon, a sturdy cart pulled by 2 strong horses. He helped Sarah up into the seat, offering a hand to steady her as she climbed. Once she was settled, he swung onto his own wagon and snapped the reins. The horses surged forward, and the 2 of them began the journey down the trail. Together, as they rode side by side, Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The cowboy was silent, his focus on the road ahead, but she could feel the tension in the air between them. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. But for now, she was grateful for the help, for the safety, and for the chance to get a little farther along the trail. The night came quickly as they traveled through the open plains. The stars above shone bright and clear, the cold of the evening creeping in. Sarah shivered as the wind picked up, but the warmth of the wagon was a welcome relief. She sat in silence, her thoughts swirling as they passed through the desolate stretch of land. The cowboy, who had introduced himself simply as Cal, kept his attention on the trail, the reins in his large hands. His eyes were sharp, always scanning the horizon, alert to any potential dangers. Sarah couldn't help but wonder about him, who he was, where he came from, and why he was out here alone. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it was often brief and to the point. There was something hard about him, like he'd seen too much and had learned not to waste words. The journey continued until they reached a small creek, the sound of the water a calming contrast to the endless silence that had stretched between them. Cal pulled the horses to a halt and climbed down from the wagon, his boots crunching on the gravel as he walked to the water's edge. Sarah sat there for a moment, unsure whether to offer to help or to remain in the safety of the wagon. Her eyes followed his movements, tall and strong, a man who had clearly spent much of his life in the wilderness. When he returned to the wagon, he handed her a small flask. "Here, you'll need this," he said gruffly. "It's just water." Sarah accepted the flask, nodding her thanks, but there was something about the way he held himself, like he wasn't used to being kind. Yet there was a tenderness in his actions, the way he made sure she was settled, the way he kept his distance but still ensured she was safe. As they continued on the road, Sarah found herself caught between gratitude and curiosity. She wasn't sure how long she'd be able to stay with him, or whether she should even trust him. But in this unforgiving world, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd just have to wait and see how things played out.